The memory mapped I/O or MMIO controller sits in the middle between the different I/O cores and the FPRO bus in here, and its purpose is to translate by decoding or multiplexing the different address signals and the different data signals from the bus into each one of the cores or from each one of the cores, whether it's reading or writing. Its construction is pretty straightforward. So taking a look at this figure shows us that the MMIO controller again sits in the middle between the bus and the different I/O cores in here. And what it does, it contains a decoder and a multiplexer, and the rest of it is just basically routing wires and broadcasting these wires everywhere. So let's take a look at this code, and in this code we have a couple of inputs or a couple of inputs outputs categories. So the first one coming from the bus in here, and as you probably see from here, it's mostly inputs, so everything that usually comes from the bus all the way to the I/O cores except for the read signal. So the read signals goes in here, gets decoded, and from the decoder gets in here. So this is the only output that we have. The rest of them are input, 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 and so forth. Similarly, on the slot interface, you will see in here that most of them are output, 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 and the only input is actually the read data that goes to the multiplexer. Okay, so taking a look at the code, it's pretty straightforward. The first thing we pay attention to is the actual address. So as it turns out, the FP address in here, which you do see is connected to the MMIO address, is technically connected to all 21-bit of the address. However, the MMIO controller doesn't utilize 21-bit. As you probably remember, it utilizes 5 plus 6, which is 11. So what it does, it actually just ignores the most significant bits. So this 2 lines of code just makes our life a little bit easier by designating a name for the lower significant 5 bits, which are the 5 least significant bits, which are called register address, the ones that specify which register inside the core I care about. These are these 5 in here, and the other one in here actually specify the slot address, basically which one of these 64 we have, and usually it takes 6 bits, and these are what is specified in here. This way our life becomes a little bit easier when we're dealing with each one of the addresses. And then the rest of the code, as you probably see in here, we have a decoder. So this decoder is implemented in such a way that it takes an input. It's actually the slot address that we just explained, which is the 6 bits, and its output is just basically a chip select that is connected to one of the I/O cores. This particular decoder has an enabled signal that is connected to the MMIO chip select, as you probably see in here. Okay, the MMIO chip select, as you probably remember, comes from the address that the processor puts. It's one of these bits, and the bridge just basically confirms it by, if you want to use the MMIO controller or you want to use one of the I/O cores, it sets it to 1, and effectively it sets this decoder and enables it. And if this decoder is enabled, at least one of these I/O cores is being active. If this decoder is not enabled, none of the I/O cores is enabled. That means the whole MMIO subsystem is deactivated, and that serves the purpose of the MMIO chip select. Next, I will jump to this one here, which is the multiplexing circuit. Again, I could have just basically moved it in here. It doesn't matter because this is Verilog. What we need to see is actually just a multiplexer, and it might not look like a multiplexer because of the code is pretty simple, but let's take a look at what slot read data array is, which is right here. So as it turns out that this is just, you can think about it as a 2D array. Each one of them is actually 32-bit, and we have about 64 of them. And the 32-bit indicate that each one of the lines coming into it is actually 32-bit wires, or 32-bit line, and I have about 64 of them. So what this code is just doing, you can go through it, it's basically taking the slot address itself, the one that we have dedicated in here, which is basically the most significant 6 bits. We put that here into a selector, and it's just route one of these output to the read signal, and that's about it. So this is the decoder and the multiplexer. The rest of the code is just basically routing wires, and the wires that are being routed are not only routed to one I/O core. You will see that they're basically broadcasted everywhere. For example, the read and the write signal are the most simple. So each read or write signal, you will see it's connected in here, and the same signal is connected in here, and the same signals are connected in here and here and here. So technically they're broadcasted. The same goes with the write data, and actually the address, these 5 bits are basically broadcasted. So with this code in here uses the generate for loop, which is a structural construct in Verilog and just utilizes to broadcast it. And it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. All it does is specify some sort of a memory array in here, and I have about 64 of them, and I just basically broadcast all of these to everywhere. So going back in here, just to recap, so if you want to use the MMIO controller, what you need to do is you need to take that code that I just showed you, and you take the code for each one of these IO cores. You instantiate all of these with the MMIO controller in a different file. You can think about it as a top file for the MMIO subsystem, so we can call it top MMIO or something like that. This one in here is what does the following. It actually connects each one of these IO cores into the MMIO controller.